born and trained to become a warrior, a hero. Some art pieces that you may have seen illustrate the Buddha as very sweet, very dreamy. And that's true from a compassion perspective. But there are also art pieces much accurate in illustrating Buddha as very masculine and a hero, a warrior, such as this one. And that is true too, because they represent the strength, not only the physical strength that the Buddha had developed, but also the spiritual strength that the Buddha developed as well when he was on his journey seeking for the truth. He came from the Kshatriya caste, which is the warrior caste. And it's quite significant that this should have been the background of a person who will become the prime exemplar of the spiritual life. It is also significant that he had been trained to be a warrior or a fighter in the worldly life. And he was also very heroic in his search for enlightenment, his search for the truth. So how he lived his life in the world was how he lived his life in the spiritual world. There was no contradiction, no conflict. So what this means to us is when we learn Buddhism, when we cultivate spiritually, we are living another life. And that spiritual life that we have, like when we come here, when we sit in meditation, should be the same as how we live our life in the world. In other words, how we carry ourselves at home, how we carry ourselves at work, how we carry ourselves in the supermarket, should be the same as how we sit in meditation. There should not be a disintegration. In fact, it should be an integration. We should live with oneself. The reason is because when we live with oneself, we become happier. It's like listening to music. Right? If you get distracted, you won't be happy. When you are absorbed in the music, you're happy and you don't want to be distracted. Oneself, and that makes us happy. That's why meditation brings happiness. We should not live a double life, practicing meditation or Buddhism and living a worldly life. Our two lives should be the same. There should not be any conflict. And when we don't have conflict, then that's happiness. Right? Prince Siddhartha was thought to live a very great life, and that it was his duty to raise a family and to rule his tribe. And his dad's aspiration was to become a universal conqueror of India. So it must have been a great emotional struggle for him to leave his family or his tribe behind when he had to go out into the darkness, the forest, not knowing where. But he only knew one purpose was to search for the truth. He traded his princely clothes with the beggar for some rags, for a begging bowl. And that's all he had. Venturing up into the woods, not knowing what would happen to him. But the story doesn't end there when he left the palace. Unlike before, he is now on his own. He's now homeless. Before, in his great palaces, he had servants. He has a beautiful maid. He had families and friends to entertain him. But now he is on his own in the forest, all by himself, and not knowing what's going to happen. And so he had to, like all the ascetics at that time, was to go and beg for food. So with his black baking bowl, he went door to beg for scraps of food. It's not easy as it sounds. The Buddha retold the first time that he went for alms round, the first time that he collected scraps of food from the peasants, and he took the food and he went out of the village to eat. One look at the scrap of food in his bowl, he vomited. Having used to food, greatest qualities, right, prepared by the best chefs, he found himself gazing down at the scraps, the leftovers of the peasants, the poor people, and his stomach just turned. He couldn't take it. But he did not allow his delicacy to be in the way of his search for the truth. If the price of freedom was to continue on this kind of diet, so be it. He had to overcome his disgust. So in his old age, he used to reminisce of the critical period of his career, of his life. He remembered that in the depth of the jungles at night, when everything was dark and everything was silent, and he would hear a branch break and a leaf fall, and a terrible panic of fear and dread would overcome him. Because around him there was nobody. It was all silent, and this breaking sound of the twigs, the branch, would create fear in him. So how was he able to subdue the fear and the dread? How did he break its hold? Well, he realized that there wasn't really anything that he had to do. He said that if while he was sitting and fear came, he would just continue to sit. If he was standing and fear came, he would continue to stand. If he was lying down and fear came to him, he would continue to lie down. Fear would pass as it had risen, and he didn't try to escape it. He would let it come and let it go. He didn't try to resist its coming, and he didn't try to escape when it came. He did not allow his fear to suffer his mind, and he was not disturbed by it. So these are, you can say, relatively minor difficulties that the Buddha encountered. Later on, he took even more arduous spiritual path. He practiced austerities more rigorously than any man alive at his time. He was experimenting different ways of getting to enlightenment, different austere practices. At that time, it seems like austere practices was what was leading to enlightenment. They thought that by torturing the body, that they could get rid of the bad evil karma, to get rid of the suffering quickly, so that they attain spiritual bliss quicker. That was the wrong thinking. But the Buddha had to go along and try different ways to test for himself the truth. Right? So he was doing different trial and errors on many practices, pushing the human limit capacity. He went naked even in bitter winter colds of the Himalayas, when the snow was laying thick on the ground. And he stopped using a bowl. He started to eat with his hand. And he heard that by cutting down food to a few grains of rice a day and reduce water intake, that it could bring him to the brink of enlightenment. And so he did. He tried that too. So this was at his peak, where he tried where nobody could. It was very difficult for people to try it. But he was able to sustain this kind of diet, this kind of practice, where it was just all skin and bones and tendons. He said that if he grabbed his stomach, he was able to grab on his spine. At that time, he practiced very rigorously than anybody, but yet he could not find a way to achieve enlightenment any closer. And then so he decided to leave this kind of practice because it was not fruitful. But Siddhartha gave it all up because he did not think that that would lead him to enlightenment. And he gave up people's expectation of him, because at that time he was really the forefront of austere practices. And he had a lot of admiration. People were adoring him, hoping that he would be successful to come and help them later on. But he gave all that up. Once again, he was back to being a nobody. And this requires spiritual courage of high and heroic order for him to give up that kind of fame. At that time, he was pretty popular for what he was practicing. It is much easy to do anything if people around us cheering us on, idolizing us, right? Look at how great he is. Look at how great she is. It's very easy for us to continue on when we have people around us admiring us, idolizing us. But it is extremely difficult to continue with our pursuit and to handle the situation when people who admire us start to flounce off in disgust of us. At that time, it is really a true test of wills. Can we continue when people all around us don't like us anymore? When we practice Buddhism, we should keep that in mind. That sometimes when we practice with a group of friends, co-practitioners, it's very easy for us to continue when everybody likes us. But if someday they don't like us anymore, do we still have the spiritual energy, the spiritual momentum to continue? Or do we just run away from it? Let me share with you a story. Hakuin, a Japanese Zen master. At that time, he was a famous Zen master. Unfortunately, he was wrongly accused of making a woman pregnant in the village, and thereby lost his reputation as a venerable Zen master, an admirable monk. When the child was born, the child was put on the doorsteps of the temple, and Hakuin took the child in and raised up the child. Some years later, the woman came and confessed that she had wrongfully, falsely accused the Zen masters because she was shielding somebody else from the problem. And so she asked for the child back, and he gave the child back. All those years, he never said anything other than, "Is it so?" When the girl was accusing him of being the father of the child, all he replied was, "Is that so?" When people said, "Well, you have to bring up the child now. The child is yours, you have to bring it up." And he would say, "Is it so?" And later on, when the woman came back to and admitted that the accusation had been false and wanted to reclaim the child, he would turn the child back to her and said, "Is it so?" At no point was he concerned about his own reputation as a virtuous Zen master. The Buddha never thought of himself as being the savior of the people. When people were cheering him on of how vigorous that he was practicing austerity, and he never had any thought of saying, "I need to continue, I cannot let them down. Right? I need to be their hero, I cannot disappoint them." He was only focusing on the right path of how to get to enlightenment. He was not concerned of the fame, the popularity that he was receiving, being the most arduous ascetic there was. So finally, having realized for himself what the true path was, Siddhartha fixed his resolve on the goal with unshakable resolution. The sutra scriptures captured this very beautifully. He said, "Let my blood dry up. Let my flesh wither away. I shall not stir away from this spot until I attain enlightenment." He didn't say, "Well, okay, let me give this a try for a few days. If it doesn't work, I'll try something else." No, he was committed. His commitment was uncompromising, and nothing left would work for him. So this is a really good lesson for us, because whether we practice Buddhism, learn spiritually, or live in a worldly life, to have success, we have to have commitment. Commitment in what we do, believe in what we do in order to have success. Because if we waver, we're going to lose. There are challenges waiting to take us down. Right? And if we waver, we give in, we will lose. You need to have that resolve in order to be successful. Because of his commitment, not willing to waver, not willing to give in, the Buddha was successful. And he finally overturned the conditioned existence. The Buddha's enlightenment was a victory over martyrdom.